Joseph Stalin, controversial leader of World War II. On the date of July 18, 1925, the autobiography of Adolf Hitler was published under the name of Mein Kampf. In the book, Hitler had written that one of his goals for Germany was to capture Poland so that it would be easier to defeat the communists of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was in between the two countries, and Hitler knew that the Soviets would try to stop the Nazis from taking Poland. To avoid contention between Germany and the Soviet Union, Hitler proposed a non-aggression pact to the country represented by Joseph Stalin. Stalin, along with other leaders of the Union, decided upon the fact that if Nazi forces were to attack the Soviets, then the Union's Red Army would be destroyed. This attack would be inevitable if Hitler's proposal was not accepted, so the leaders accepted the pact. The pact was signed on August 23, 1939, and was meant to last for the next 10 years. Germany, however, broke their side of the deal on the 22nd of June, 1941, by ambushing the USSR with some 3 million troops. This attack marks the date when the Soviet Union joins the Second World War. Thesis: Joseph Stalin's leadership throughout World War II surely changed the outcome of the war, even though his methods of leading were often too cruel. His decisions in the war, despite being followed through fear, allowed his country to defend themselves from the Nazis in the battle for Stalingrad and stalled Hitler's plans for capturing Poland. The decisions with and without the other major Allies leaders also led to the eventual defeat of the Nazi forces. Because of all this and more, Stalin left a legacy of a mean, cruel man, but one who was able to accomplish great things.
He rose to the ranks of the Bolshevik Revolution. He was utterly, in the most unalloyed sense, the most ruthless man in Russia. He would do anything to advance what he thought were the goals of the revolution and to advance his own personal place. In many ways, the Russian people were saved by him at the beginning of World War II because of his steel will. He took the name Stalin because he's a man of steel. And when the Germans turned and began to invade Russia, they underestimated Joe Stalin. He stayed in Moscow even though they got within 40 miles of the center of the capital. And when Stalingrad, the battle for Stalingrad began, he gave orders that can only now be described as the most blood-curdling, ruthless orders imaginable. No one will abandon their post.
As Tim Brokaw said in the video clip, he, Stalin, was utterly, in the most unavoided sense, the most ruthless man in Russia. He would do anything to advance what he thought were the goals of the revolution and to advance his own personal place image. End quote. Brokaw gives evidence to this claim when he shares something Stalin said at the beginning of the Battle of Stalingrad, which was, "No one will abandon their posts." Stalin knew that soldiers staying at their posts, even if doing so would do little good towards his cause, or would cause their deaths, would ever so slightly help him to defeat the Nazi armies. Even though he knew this, he went through with this, severely punishing anyone who left their designated posts without orders to do so. Later on in the video, Brokaw explains how later on in the war, when the Nazi forces were running low on supplies, some of the German soldiers would ask the children residents of the cities they were attacking to fill up their canteens and the water sources found inside the towns in exchange for leftover food. When Stalin found out about this, he ordered his snipers to kill both the thirsty enemies and the small children. These are great examples of how Stalin was such a brutal leader and would do anything necessary to achieve his goals. Before all of the events that Brokaw explained, Stalin had had a nervous breakdown. As Dwight John Zimmerman, author of several military history books, explained, at 3 o'clock in the morning on June 22, 1941, 6,000 German army cannons belched fire and destruction at Russian outposts along a frontier border through what was once Poland. Up and down the line, terrified Russian guards radioed their headquarters with the same message: "We are being fired upon. What shall we do?" The replies from headquarters were one of disbelief. "You must be insane." End quote. Stalin had been warned of this attack by over 80 sources such as spies, other Allies leaders, and German deserters, yet still had not planned for the attack. The Russian guards' reaction to the radio message to headquarters was very similar to that of Stalin, which is to say that he was very much in shock. Less than a day after Stalin heard the news, he resigned from his position as Supreme Soviet. Foreign Minister Molotov, who was close to Stalin, reported that Stalin had shut himself away from everybody, was receiving nobody, and was not answering the phone. End quote. Several Politburo members from the Committee for Multiple Soviet Political Parties came to Stalin's residence several days after he had stopped talking to anyone. The members invited him back to the party, which Stalin accepted after his few days of calming down. Stalin was able to see how few decisions were made in his absence, making him want to do a better job leading his country as they depended on him so much. This can be seen as a major reason for why Stalin was so passionate about his leading. Although Stalin may not have been making the decisions directly on the battlefield during the Battle of Stalingrad, he was staying in the USSR's capital of Moscow, approving large decisions and supervising his subordinates. When the enemy troops were nearing Moscow, Stalin became the center of decision-making, truly the army's general. Stalin was confident in his army's ability to fend off the attackers, even though they had been losing many recent battles. This was proved when he decided to stay in the Capitol building of Moscow, the Kremlin, throughout the battle. Stalin was correct in his assumption that the Nazi forces would be pushed away, as on the date of February 2, 1943, the enemy received orders to retreat from the city to already conquered Soviet cities. Quite a while later than the mentioned events of World War II, Stalin died of a cerebral hemorrhage on the 5th of March 1953. Approximately 3 years after the death of Joseph Stalin, a Soviet politician named Nikita Khrushchev started planning on how to reveal the horrendous acts of Stalin to the public. Khrushchev discussed his plans with some of his colleagues. Two of these men were Clement Voroshilov and Foreign Minister Molotov. As found on the site of History in an Hour, quote, "These were men with blood on their hands, who, under Stalin's orders, had facilitated and organized the liquidation of tens or hundreds of thousands of their countrymen and women." End quote. The conference that Khrushchev decided to speak on this topic at was the 20th Conference of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, a meeting where individuals well known in the Soviet community gave speeches about things pertaining to communists. The speech that Khrushchev gave revealed all the bad things that Stalin had done over his career as Supreme Soviet, and even some of the things he did to achieve the title of Supreme Soviet. This caused his legacy to change dramatically for the worse, and for the public to see him for the savage man that he was. Khrushchev did not, however, discredit Stalin's achievements, leaving the legacy of Stalin leading the country especially well. Shortly after the conference had ended, the name of the city of Stalingrad was changed to Volgograd, and Stalin's body was removed from a place of respect in the Kremlin to his hometown in Georgia. To conclude, Stalin was a brutish man who did anything that he could do to achieve his goals or the ultimate goals of the Soviet Union. This was shown in all of the deaths that he chose not to prevent, so that he could slightly tip the scales in the favor of the USSR's Red Army. He was also a great leader, despite having his commands followed through fear. His decisions allowed the Soviet Union to fend off the attacking forces from Germany and aided in the eventual defeat of the Nazis. His leadership was crucial to the outcome of the war, and if he had not been leading the Soviet Union, our world today could be in much worse shape than it is.